Hi, I'm Philip Brunton and welcome to Jazz Play lesson number 10. And yes, this is the final lesson of our 10 lesson series. Now this lesson not only celebrates what you've learned, but also introduces a few final chords and scales which will all be put together in our final improvisation piece today. Now a reminder to download your PDF lesson number 10 worksheet, which is available at mymusicpb.com/jazzplate. So looking at the worksheet from the top, you'll see a review of all the chords you've learned so far. And I'll remind you that we're going to be in the same key here, so regardless of what instrument. So we'll hear a G major chord, and it's shown as a remind yourself that a letter by itself reflects a G major chord. That's a major third and the perfect fifth. And then the M, G minor, the minor third. And each of those chords can have a sixth attached. So the major six, and then the minor six. Lovely sound. And now we can add the sevenths to each of these chords. We have a minor seventh with a minor third, the perfect fifth, and there's the minor seventh. Okay, and then if we take the major chord, 1, 3, 5, and add that minor seventh, it's the dominant seventh. Okay, then we have the G major 7, so the major chord, but now a major seventh interval. And we have next a minor chord, minor third, perfect fifth, and a major 7. So the next chord is G7, sus4. Remind yourself that you have your 1, the 4th instead of the 3rd, the 5th, and this is the 7th, G7. That sus4 chord, and now a minor 7 flat 5, also known as a half diminished. We have minor third, diminished fifth, but a minor 7. Okay. Now all those chords are shown. They don't need to show tensions. You see underneath the tensions are the 9th, 11th, and 13th. Which remind yourself the 9th is like having a second, the 11th is the 4th, and the 13th is the 6th. It's just upper structures of that 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13. We don't need to show those unless they're altered in the chord. So if you can alter a 13th to be a flat 13th, you can alter the 11th to be a sharp 11th, and the 9th to be flat or sharp. And so you'll find you might have, say, G7, flat 13, or G7, sharp 9, flat 13. You'll find dominant sevenths always have more altered tensions than any other type of chord. Now next, from every chord we can build a scale, and in building scales we need to be aware of the chord tones, any tensions and altered tensions, and thinking about the surrounding harmony to help us decide on what the extra notes should be. So in this case, we have a G7 flat 13 flat 9, so I have the 1, 3, 5, and the 7th, 1 flat 9 because it's the 2nd, 3rd, the 11th, the 5th, the flat 13th, 7th, and then we tend to show chord scales with an octave. Some books actually include a 9th in there as well. In this case, be a flat 9th. Okay, so those are building your chords. And next to that, one last type of chord I wanted to show you how it's written. If you see there, it says G7/B. And that's telling us that the B, the third of the chord, is going to be in the bass. It's a voicing. It doesn't affect our improvisation. It's just when we're listening or the accompaniment will be playing, the bass or the piano will be making sure that the third of the chord is in the bass. So in the /B, we're looking at the G7 for us as improvisers. Okay, so throughout this course we've learned that there's a key number of chord scales that we want to learn. And so they're highlighted here in our warm-up today. And now looking at your warm-up, now we're back to transpose for everybody. We first show a major scale, followed by a Mixolydian scale, and then a Dorian, the natural minor, also known as the Aeolian, the harmonic minor, and then followed by the melodic minor. Those are the main chord scales that you want to be very fluent with in each key. And the idea is that from some of those you can get all your other chord scales, such as the major scale will give you all the Dorian, Lydians, and all those built from which degree you start on. And if you look at the melodic minor, that's a really important one as well, because if you start from the 7th note, you get the altered scale, also known as the diminished whole tone scale. If you start a melodic minor from the 4th degree, you get a Lydian flat 7, and that's a common chord that you'll be using in improvisation as well. Okay, so when you're playing through this, you'll notice from the major going to the Mixolydian, you're just flattening the 7th. And then from the Mixolydian to the Dorian, you'll be flattening the 3rd. From the Dorian to the natural minor, you'll be flattening the 6th. Then as we go to the harmonic minor, you'll be raising the 7th. And then if you go to the final melodic minor, you'll be raising the 6th and 7th. And then that takes you back to, if you want to repeat, into the major again by just raising the 3rd. So it's a great way of going through it a couple times. But I've recorded it as our warm-up, just going through it once. Okay, just before we begin, let's have a tuning note on concert A 440. Again. So what you want to do is start it from another tonal center and going through it in a different key. And that's where it's helpful to know what notes you want to lower or raise as you go from each type of scale. The other thing you want to do is build the tempo of this. It's great to be able to play swing up to a fast tempo. And I've shown here some tempo targets right up to 208. We played 104. 208 swing can be quite quick. And what you want to do, instead of really highlighting the swing, you want to make use of the articulations that are shown. So it's almost like playing straight when you play really quick, but that articulation gives you that feeling of a sensation of swing. So you get... You see how it's that? It's almost like playing straight, but that articulation just gives it a sense of swing to it. So you can try building up your tempo up to that level. And as you gradually work through different keys. Okay, moving on. Our new chord today is an augmented chord. When we look at augmented chords, it's shown with a letter with a plus sign. The letter is saying it's a major 3rd, we know. And the plus is saying the 5th is augmented. So we have our... We're going to be all in the same key here for a moment as we're looking at this. So we all have a G augmented chord. There's a 1, 3, and then instead of the perfect 5th, we have an augmented 5th. We can also have a 1, 3 augmented and the dominant 7th. Dominant 7th with an augmented 5th. Augmented 7 chord. And if you look at that scale that has for the G augmented 7th, we use a whole tone scale. In this case, the G, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, F, G, they're all a tone apart, so it's a symmetrical scale. And you'll see that there are 2 different types of whole tone scales for all 12 keys. So the first group there, any of those notes shown, the G, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, F, and G, you can build an augmented 7 chord from any of those notes. And then in the second group, you can build an augmented chord from any of those different notes. Okay, so there's only 2 different groups of whole tones you need to learn. So that takes us to the next exercise, which is going to be working on those 2 different groups. might be a more unfamiliar sound, especially when you go to that fourth note. 1, 2, 3 sounds major, but adding that fourth, that augmented fourth, is different. We'll be using that chord in scale when we're improvising. Now let's move on to page 2. Our new type of chord is a diminished seventh chord. Again, we're all in the same key. Our G diminished seventh. We have the 1 minor third, a diminished fifth. It's like a minor fifth. We call it a diminished fifth. It's a lowered fifth. And then a diminished seventh. So you hear that sound? 1, 3, diminished. There. Okay, now if you look at that, the next chord, you'll find that G diminished 7 built within the E flat 7 flat 9 chord. You see how it's the upper part of it. So we call this a secondary dominant function diminished 7th chord. If you look at the key, the final chord there is A flat major 7. The secondary dominant of that A flat major 7 chord is the E flat 7. We learned that in previous lessons. And that is substituted with a diminished 7th chord. So we call it a secondary dominant function diminished 7th. Can you see how that 1, 3, 5, 7 is found in the 3rd, 5, 7, and 9th of that chord? Okay, there's another type of diminished 7th, chromatic functioning. So we have an F sharp half diminished 7th, followed by a G diminished 7th, and then an E7 / G sharp. So the F sharp half diminished 7th notes all move chromatically. Each note moves chromatically, except the E top note, that stays the same. These work as long as they move chromatically or stay the same, the note. Goes chromatically up to the diminished 7th chord, G diminished 7, and then that chromatically moves into the next one. You see the E stays throughout the entire thing. And the bottom note is G sharp of the E7 chord, because we've learned that slash, that's what it means. Okay, these are chromatic function diminished 7ths. When we come up with our scales, we use what's called diminished scale. And again, there are 2 different patterns of diminished scales that we'll learn. If you look at both of those, based on the G diminished, both lines, you'll see the 1, 3, and 5, and 7th are the same notes. The difference lies in that what the notes are in between. So in the top line, we have the 1, and then a whole tone above, then the 3, a whole tone above, 5, whole tone above, 7, whole tone above. And then the second one is the 1, a semitone above, the 3rd, semitone above, 5th, semitone above, 7th, semitone above. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to do an exercise now. The next exercise with diminished chord scales. It plays through the chord and then plays through its version, pattern 1 for that chord. And just like the augmented, which only has 2 different types of chords that you have to learn, the diminished only has 3. So I have group 1, 2, and 3. You'll see in group 1 you can build a diminished chord from each of those notes, or group 2 or group 3. This is working with the diminished scale, working from a whole tone above each chord tone. Okay. learning that exercise, you'll be able to tackle any diminished chord in its scale. You'll find those diminished and augmented chords have a lot of instability about them. They create a lot of motion and energy within your music when they're written in. So now we're going to move on to page 3. And if we want to add more color to our improvisation, we're adding more chromatic notes outside of the harmony. And so a great way to do this is through approach tones. So if you look back at your previous exercise where we had the diminished 7th scale, and when we had our chord tone, and then a semitone leading to the 3rd, a semitone leading to the 5th, a semitone leading to the 7th, and then a semitone leading octave, and then coming down we have a whole tone leading to the 7th, the 5th, 3rd, and the root whole tones. So if we did that with a G major chord, let's say we're all in the same key here together, looking at this line 2 of page 3, we have the G, and then we have a semitone to the 3rd, a semitone to the 5th, semitone to the root again. Coming down diatonically, saying we're in the key of, that means we're using key notes, we're a whole tone down to the root, a whole tone down to the 5th. In this case, we're a semitone down to the 3rd. Okay, if we stay diatonically coming down, it's a semitone to the major 3rd. If it was a minor 3rd, it'd be a whole tone. And then a whole tone to the root. So here's an example of single approach notes on the G major chord. Coming downward diatonically, there's nothing chromatic about that. Going up, we added a few extra new notes through using chromaticism. Okay, if you can have single, you can have double approach. And it's basically putting those two together. If you're coming from above, you're doing the diatonic. If you're coming from below, you're doing semitone. And so you get line 3. So the next exercise we're going to do makes use of the double approach in all keys. It's also known as surround tones in this case because we're surrounding the target note. In this case, we got the 5th and the 3rd, and if you go that extend a little further, you'll see it's also the root of that chord. And then through the cycle of fifths, it keeps changing. And so it's a great way to get to know our double approach notes in any key. So if you can have single approach tones and double approach tones, why not have triple approach tones? So if we go to page 4, these triple approach tones with surrounding to the target, you'll see we have 2 notes above and 1 note below, and it's chromatic. Okay, so we're all in the same key here for a moment. I have a G chord, we have C sharp, C, A sharp to the target B. And we do the same, working our way through, and it sounds like. Now, if you want to do that little diatonic adjustment for that 3rd, you could also, instead of doing 2 above, you can do 1 above on the going when we're targeting the 3rd and 2 below. And so that's the diatonic adjustment shown here on line 2. You don't have to do the diatonic adjustment, but it's a great little alteration that you can add into your playing. When you're putting together your improvisation, these added chromatic notes, it's a little bit of mix and match. So here's an example, line 3. I'm doing a couple doubles and triples and see where they're going, diatonic adjustments. See how many more notes you have available to you than just sticking to a G major scale. So again, this is adding far more color to your improvisation. Our next exercise is chromatic triple approach. And it's given us an opportunity to work both versions where there's 2 above and 1 below, and then also when there's 1 above and 2 below. So I've adjusted it accordingly, you'll see there for each one. And we're going through the cycle of fifths. So you can think of it as targeting the 5th and then targeting the 3rd of each note. And then the next bar is kind of extended into the root of each of it. And then it changes for each as we go through the cycle of fifths. The other way of looking at it, I've shown it also, is in the first bar, you can see it as a 2-5-1. And this is really, and we're using 2-5-1s all the time. So if you get to know it's in 2-5-1, pick that first note of the first full bar and you play through that, you'll get to know that very quickly by memory. And as you see 2-5-1, you can just throw that in. So when we're playing through this, you'll notice there's no breath mark shown, and there's no place to breathe. So take breath wherever you need. You can slip in a quick one or miss out a note if you need to. First time we go through it, we're going to use the cycle of fifths. The second time, the chord progressions are going to change, so you're doing that 2-5-1 shown. Okay, that can be quite difficult first time reading through. I had to practice it myself. So how you want to build this up is in little groups, and you play it 1 beat each. First, slurring. And that's the first group. And then do it as 8th notes or quavers, but straight. And then you can do 16ths or semi-quavers. Get really confident, then add the swing. And then you build up the whole thing. So as we move to page 5, we can say we've learned all our scales and all our chords, and we're quite confident in all the keys if you've done all your practicing. So then that means you're ready to approach any type of improvisation. It's a question of how you approach it. Now I've shown you here on page 5, 3-level approach to improvisation. So I've shown you a 4-bar phrase, all in the same key here for a moment. We're all going to see a G major 7, E7, A minor 7, D7 on the 3rd bar, and then G major 7 on the final bar. Now the first level, you want to approach it. If you've never played the piece before and you're not confident with the chords yet, you can just figure out what key you're in. You're in the key of G major, and you have a G major pentatonic scale. And that'll work right through. If you want to take that a little further, you can do some substitute pentatonics to build more color into your solo. And you can even do a pentatonic for each chord, whether it's a major or minor chord, major or minor pentatonic. But in the basic level, one pentatonic will work for the whole piece. Taken to the next level, your improvisation, we know the chord tones. And we build up the chord tones, and we see the G major 7. Then we have the E7 chord, the A minor, D7, and G major written out there for you. And from there, you can build some guide tones, like a melody from the chord tones. In my example here, I have the 5th going to the 3rd of the first chord, and then the 7th going to the 5th, which happens to be the same notes as the first bar. Then on the 3rd bar, we have the 3rd of the chord going to the root of the D7 chord, and then finishing on the root of the G7 chord. So just let's have a listen to that. take those guide tones and add a few passing and auxiliary notes, you get the next example. Okay, moving along to using some chromatic approach to those guide tones. And now the third level is when we make use of our chord scales. So in the second bar we have our E7. Knowing that it's the secondary 5 of the 2 that's coming up, we can put a flat 13 in it. And we get this Mixolydian scale with a flat 13th in it. It's the same as a melodic minor from the 5th degree. And we learned that last lesson. Okay, so if we make use of our chord scales and maybe a little mix and match with all our other approach notes, we get this version. Three layers to work with as you build up your improvisation. As you get more confident, you might even want to add some what's called double time. Double time is when you're maintaining 16ths or semiquavers in the UK, and it gives that feeling you've gone twice as fast, but you're still maintaining the same speed. So here's an example of double time feel, and you'll hear some sequences shown in there as well. Now I suggest that these three levels are not only a progressive level for you to approach, but also can be blended together to form your ideal solo. So you can bring together the pentatonic scales and then also the chord tones, including auxiliary and passing notes and your approach tones. And then you can also include your chord scale. So it's a combination of all three, which ideally takes us to page 6 now on your worksheet, which is 10 considerations in building your solos. First, you want to analyze your chords. This helps us to know what key we're in, the chord tones, and the chord scales that you choose. Next, we want to think about the form of the song and the phrase structures that we'll be using. How does the length of your solo fit within the framework of the song? So, the form might be a 32 bars, which you'll have your A section repeated twice, and then you'll have your bridge, and then the A returns. You might have a 12-bar blues with 3 4-bar phrases. We've talked about using phrase structures in previous lessons, and that'll help you build your solo. Next consideration is your rhythmic motion. Do you want your solo to be really active, really full of drive, or do you want it to be more passive, more singing qualities within your playing? Don't be afraid of using long notes and rest in your solos, but at the same time have the confidence and fluency in your skills to be able to play very quick, almost double time passages if required. Which leads us to think about the style of the music and the tempo that you've chosen. Melodic ideas can include motifs and sequences. They have an ability to draw the listener in. So if I give you an example, if I go, the listener can identify and recognize that second passage because in reflection of the first one you played. And that helps them connect with you in the solo. Next, we want to use not just our knowledge, but also our ears in helping us guide through our melodic-harmonic relationship of what we play. Some notes will sound great with some chords, but then will offer much more tension on other chords. Now, I don't want to think about wrong notes. What you want to think about more is the tension and the release of that tension. Next, we have dynamics. Bring some light and shade into your solo. Dynamics can also help with the shape of our solo, including building up to a climax, which can also include other factors such as rhythmic drive and some melodic tension. Articulations are often overlooked when it comes to improvisation because they're not written down. But articulations allow us to inflect notes, giving them more prominence and more change of character. Now, one of the most important considerations is to listen to the rhythm section, especially when it's live. because you want to connect together with them. You're working together to build your solo. You might offer a motif that's passed on to the drummer, or fed the other way around. You hear something that you wish to bring into your solo. Dynamics are also built together by listening and feeding off of each other. Work together for a much more unified sound as you build your solo. And number 10 is my favorite. Build a story in your solo. Introduce your characters. There's little motifs you can bring in. Develop these ideas. Build into a climax which eventually gets resolved over the course of your solo. These 10 considerations will become second nature with you with practice, even if you're just using one pentatonic level approach. I highly recommend listening to other solos, both live and recorded. You can learn a lot from their ideas, but remember, you have your own unique voice to find and shine in your solos. Okay, for our final lesson, I have 2 tunes to improvise with. We'll start with the blues with additional chords. Continuing on page 6, you'll first see the outline of the blues in its basic format with the 1, 4, and 5 chords. Now under that, I've shown the 12-bar blues with additional chords that you will find and make use of. So our first chord is just like the earlier version. And then now on the second bar, we quite often will substitute the 4 chord into there, and then returning back to the 1 chord again. So on the 4th bar now, we have a secondary 2-5 leading us to the 4 chord of the next line. Now on the second line, second bar, we have a chromatic functioning diminished 7th chord. And all the notes are chromatically passing through the first bar into the second, into the 3rd bar, which is back to our 1-7 chord, but now with a /5th on the bottom. Okay. Now on our final bar of that line, we have a secondary 2-5, and the 2 is a half diminished. And that tells us we're going off to a 2, this target chord is a minor, which you'll find on the next line. Okay. So on the 3rd line now, we have a 2-5 heading to our 1-7 chord on the 3rd bar. And then finally, the last 3 chords is what we call a turnaround. And there's different forms of turnarounds. Here's an example of a turnaround where we have a secondary dominant 7th leading to a 2-5, which goes back to the 1 at the beginning. For the secondary 2-5s, I've shown them in brackets, the tonality, so it helps you along as well. So you have 3-level approach. You could start with just a blues scale when you're improvising this. You've got your chord tones with, you can use auxiliary and passing notes and approach tones. And then also you have your chord scales that you can make use of. I'll give you an example, and then I'll get you to play it through 4 times. Now our final improvisation is from Duke Ellington's It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got the Swing. What's great about Duke Ellington, he can come up with so many chords that still relate to the original key, but gives us so many more colors. So if we're looking at what we've got here, our first chord, it's a minor. We're in a minor key, and I've shown you in your individual worksheets for your key that we're in. And then the second chord, slash, we have the major seventh on the bottom. And then the major slash on the next chord with a minor seventh on the bottom. And then we have a dominant seventh chord with a third on the bottom. So that's the first two bars. Then we have a tritone substitution. The dominant seventh that's shown there at the beginning of the third bar is a tritone substitution going to its 5 of the next one and then leading to the final chord of that line, which is back to the 1 minor. The second line in the first time bar is the dominant seventh. Then we have that diminished seventh chromatically passing through to the major 6th chord that's there with a third on the bottom. And we finish with an augmented 7 chord of that line, which is using our whole tone. And that takes us back to the repeat. So we take the repeat and we have the same set of chords in the first line. And then we jump to the third line for the second time bar, which is basically a secondary 5 of the 5 of the 1 now in the relative major. Okay, and that's shown there. On the fourth line, you think we're in a major key now. We've got 2, 5 of 1. So we have the 2, 5 of the 4 chord. So on the fifth line, we have a 2 followed by a 5 of the next bar, the third bar, that dominant seventh. And that 5 is a flat 7 subdominant minor chord. It's also the 5 of the major key that we're in. So there's two ways of looking at that third bar. It's either a dominant seventh of the major key or dominant seventh based on the flat 7 of the minor key. And then we have the 5 dominant seventh of the minor key to finish off that line, which takes us nicely to the 6th line, which is the same as the first line. And you see the final line is like the second line. Okay, and the final chord there, on the last time we would play that final chord, it just takes us back into the repeats. Okay, so I'll play it through a demo and then I'll let you play it on your own for 4 times. that. The first time you might have wanted to just use the pentatonic scale through the whole thing, and then gradually build into chord tones, auxiliary passing notes and approach tones, and finally full mastery of your chord scales. So that finishes off our 10-lesson course. Well done to you. My intention was to progressively guide you through all this information with practical skills. But as Confucius said over 2,500 years ago, knowledge without practice is useless. I wish you enjoyment and success as you further your improvisation skills and find your unique voice through experience. Thank you for sharing this time with me. Bye for now.